Well, look, thank you all for joining us this afternoon for Eliminating Complexity. The idea of this is to look at today's session really in its entirety, understanding a little bit around those complexities that we often see of taking those kind of silo-based technologies and tools that people use, those disparate systems, and trying to give some clarity around how you may move that into a more unified SecOps positioning in the market. And I think, the idea of today being working in unison with Jamie at Microsoft and obviously our own MVP, Alan Armstrong, just to kind of help demystify some of that from a licensing angle, but also to give you a bit of a breakdown of kind of some of those complexities that are often faced around the risks of migrating technologies, say from a Mimecast over across to a Defender for Office. So I think, without further ado, it'd be interesting to kind of just let everybody have an opportunity to speak. But fundamentally, questions and answers I'll take throughout this session, and we'll save them towards the last sort of 10 minutes that we're saved for that, to ensure that everybody can have an opportunity to ask the questions they want to. I think one of the most important things that we find is that there are certain critical events that drive an outcome to organizations making this change. And that can fundamentally be something simple, such as a termination of a contract, or it can be something around a regulatory compliance that you've got to adhere to, or one of the frameworks such as NIST, ISO 27001, or Cyber Essentials Plus. So I think one of the most important things is that little bit of governance, that bit of discovery, that understanding where people are and how they're structured as an organization to achieve their goals. And I think what Alan will talk us through in a bit of detail is how we go in from that point of conception and then build out that phased, managed approach to migration across to the newfound technology. So without further ado, I will hand over to Jamie that's going to talk us through a little bit around some of that licensing and some of the purposes behind unified SecOps. And as I said, any questions or answers, please put them in the chat and we'll make sure they're covered off at the end of this session.
Fantastic. No, thanks for handing over, John. Obviously, lovely to be here today. I've been asked by the ITC team to come in and support. So yeah, really keen to kind of jump into some of this context. I guess, as you probably saw on the first slide, I'm Jamie, one of the security specialists here at Microsoft. So yeah, really just want to kind of give you my high-level perspective and kind of Microsoft's high-level perspective on some of the changes I think that we're seeing in the market at the moment, or I guess changes that we've seen in the last few years. Put a bit of commentary for you around like how we're seeing customers adapt to those changes, and then yeah, really just try and demystify some of the Microsoft licensing. I know it can be perceived to be a bit nuanced, shall we say, but yeah, happy to kind of go through a little bit of detail. But yeah, I think that's probably what I want to go through. If you've got any questions, obviously please do feel free to put them in the group chat, and then yeah, we can try and answer those at the end. So I mean, I think it's probably obvious for me to say, and hopefully as kind of security leaders on this call, you're gonna be well understood around the fact that I think security has massively changed over the last few years. And I think what we're really seeing from a Microsoft perspective is probably two main drivers behind those changes. So I'd say obviously the kind of first one is really the enterprise environment itself that we're looking to secure. So I guess previously our data and our identities would have been really kind of secured within our own firewalls, within our own environments. And I think really what we've seen with the kind of rise of multi-cloud, you've got kind of data fragmented across a variety of different environments. Obviously with hybrid working exacerbated by COVID, we've now got employees accessing company resources or kind of critical applications from all over the globe potentially. So I guess kind of that first main driver really is the enterprise, the complexity of the enterprise environment that we're looking to secure has kind of massively increased over the last few years, right? And I'm sure that's a bit of a pain point that some of you guys will be running into today. So that's probably kind of the first main driver that we see. I'd say the second main one really is the nature of the attacks themselves. Obviously, from a Microsoft perspective, we're definitely seeing a massive increase in the speed, scale, and sophistication of those attacks. And I think obviously with the rise of AI and LLMs over the last kind of 18 to 24 months, especially with the kind of agentic world that we're now looking into as kind of security practitioners, yeah, the threat landscape that we're having to evolve to is also increased, I think. So those are probably kind of the two main changes that we're seeing customers having to adopt their security strategy to over the last few years. So that's just a bit of a summary in terms of some of those changes. And I guess the challenge that presents and the kind of thing that I run into most with customers is that previously what they would have done is they would have kind of procured specific point-based security solutions for some of those specific security challenges, be it obviously a different EDR technology for your endpoints or an email security tool or whatever it may be. I think really the kind of problem is this will just create a kind of patchwork of protection effectively, whereby you may have a bunch of different kind of point-based security solutions that don't really talk to one another. And I guess if they do talk to one another, they may have been potentially hard to integrate or costly to integrate, and you're going to be managing kind of multiple vendor contracts, potentially with some inflated costs across like multiple different kind of contracts that you may have. So that's obviously quite a tricky situation to be in. I think really it's just going to produce a bunch of different gaps in your security posture. So I think we're definitely trying to help customers move to a kind of modern security platform approach. And that's really how we've tried to build our Microsoft strategy over the last few years. So effectively moving you to a kind of network of interconnected security tools that will effectively seamlessly talk to one another. You're going to be able to correlate events across that entire stack, obviously resulting in probably only the high fidelity alerts being pushed through to the SOC. It's going to massively increase your kind of security posture, drive down that mean time to detect, drive down that mean time to respond. And obviously kind of why we're here today is it's going to massively reduce that amount of complexity that you're dealing with, both from like a contracting perspective, a vendor perspective as well. So yeah, that's really kind of the shift that we've seen. And look, it's probably worth noting we're obviously not the only vendor that's adopted a similar strategy within this kind of platform space, but I definitely feel like we are one of the vendors leading the way and kind of supporting customers with that shift from your legacy security ecosystem to kind of that modern security platform. And I think Alan will kind of come on to some of the more specifics in a second. And I guess it's probably worth pointing out, obviously, that kind of legacy security ecosystem model can be extremely complicated to manage from a kind of technology and kind of procurement perspective. And what we've obviously tried to do is simplify that entire model by packaging up our security solutions into either E3 or E5 or our E7 enterprise SKUs. So, I mean, I've given the example here, but for the kind of EDR and the email security piece that we're discussing today, we have a package called Enterprise M365 E5. So, I mean, you may have heard of it, but for those who haven't, that's effectively our advanced security suite for your users. So it's going to cover everything for your users across your threat protection, your identity, your data security type use cases. So, and I think the fact that we've got these different kind of licensing bundles, depending on where you are in your journey, you can absolutely kind of jump in and start driving value from the existing tooling you may have. And then really when we look to kind of support you with a migration to a kind of modern security platform, we can come in, we can understand a bit more about your incumbent technologies, map those to E5, and then obviously for the kind of two main benefits of firstly, building out that kind of positive cost case where you're going to start to see a bit of a return on investment from simplifying and consolidating down to kind of a one vendor platform based approach, and then obviously kind of help to quantify some of those associated security benefits as well. So hopefully that kind of helps just to explain a little bit around the kind of licensing piece, and I'm happy to take questions on that in a minute. But I mean, I'm conscious that I've very much covered the kind of the changes and the why that we would do this. It's really where we would look to work with a fantastic partner such as ITC Secure to actually help you with the how. Obviously, some of these migrations can be quite daunting to approach, but I think, yeah, working alongside myself from a Microsoft perspective and a partner like ITC Secure, we're really kind of there to hold your hand every step in the way. And the partners, I think, are fantastic in kind of demonstrating that journey and what it's going to take to actually kind of move to this kind of consolidated security platform from a security perspective. So that's a kind of whistle stop tour. I've tried to kind of keep it down to about 5 minutes, but yeah, happy to take questions at the end of today's webinar or any other kind of questions you may have. So fantastic. Hopefully that's been clear. I think, Alan, do you want me to hand over to yourself to kind of go into a bit more of the detail?
Yeah, sure. Hi everyone. My name is Anne Armstrong. I'm head of cloud security here at ITC, and a Microsoft MVP in SIEM, cloud security, and XDR. So let's just kind of go from where Jamie was, and let's look at, what's the typical migrations we're now seeing from third-party solutions into Microsoft. So EDR has always been, over the last 4 or 5 years, that's been sort of the first one that we've ever seen, from a partner perspective, seeing those migrations go from, the Sophoses of the world, the CrowdStrikes, the Sentinel ones. That was always the first one that we've seen as migrations over the last 4 or 5 years. In the last couple of years, we've now started to see email security, so Defender for Office, moving away from Mimecast, moving away from Proofpoints. Previously, before that, Mimecast and Proofpoint were key leaders in that market, in that space. And organizations have them and still have them in today, and they are, they're in for 5-10 years, most likely. I don't exactly know how long Mimecast has been around, but definitely for 5 years, and it's a hard decision to decide to move to another technology. It doesn't matter if it is Microsoft or another email security perspective. There's a lot of history of configuration there, and then you've got to rebuild somewhere else. But we are starting to see that shift, that move into looking to bring it into the Microsoft technology. And a similar thing with SIEM, Microsoft Sentinel. We're seeing new builds of it all the time, and now we're starting to see those migrations where there's a lot of data in those other SIEM solutions, Splunk, QRadar. It's now looking at how that can be transitioned over. So we'll definitely see a lot of that. And again, we're going to talk around some of the shift in a minute. So if I move on to the next slide. Again, any questions, put them into the Q&A, and John will catch us up at the end around that. So we're seeing that conversation shift. So, 2-3 years ago, it was, should I be moving to Microsoft? Are they a trusted security partner? Bearing in mind the view from the world, Microsoft's been around for a long time, and it's been a software company moving into those cloud services, moving into 365, and productivity solutions, device management. In the last sort of 4 or 5 years, then Microsoft have then moved into the security space, and it has been an unknown. I've witnessed the progress that Microsoft have taken to get to where they are today. So seeing that shift, unless you were on that journey with them and being part of that move with them, it's hard to sort of see where they came from to where they are today. So there was a lot of unknown. Is it safe to move to Microsoft? Now we're seeing that conversation is changing to, when should I move, or how do I move safely? How do I get from a Mimecast to Defender for Office? How do I get from a CrowdStrike to Defender for Endpoint? Or CrowdStrike to Defender for Identity, because some of the solutions do come across. So that's the change that we're seeing today. It's not now should I, it's now how do I kind of sort of step. Moving on. So again, talking around what Jamie was saying, why are organizations now looking to move? Microsoft is now top quadrants of the Gartner Magnet quadrants now for EDR, email security, SIEM, plus some of the other sort of solution areas that they have. Previously 2-3 years ago, Microsoft didn't submit to those kind of those reports. So it was out of mind, but yet that technology was still as efficient as some of those solutions out there. It's only now that Microsoft have pushed into those, being, analyzed to understand, where they are in the market, and we're now seeing that they are, top quadrants. Alongside that, because Microsoft's been, the security solution have now been around for 4 to 5 years now, we can now validate and prove that they're consistent in their rollout globally. Being able to trust that platform now, because we're seeing use cases out there, references where it's done protection above and beyond, again, along with this unified platform. And again, the next one being that unified platform, Jamie talking about the signals sort of coming in together. When you have the separate solutions, and yes, you may have Sentinel to bring those signals in and build that content to be able to correlate within that solution. It's not just the alerting part; it's also the remediation. When you have that unified platform, you're able to remediate across the different sort of product areas, all the the protections. The example being that an email comes in at the time it isn't weaponized. It comes in and goes to the user's mailbox. The user clicks on it, downloads something, that becomes weaponized. Defender for Endpoint picks that up, identifies it as a risk now, and then the signals go back into the XDR system. That then identifies where that email came from, or how it came into the organization, where it's been seen. It's been seen in an email. It will then go off and purge that from any other mailboxes that might be in there to reduce the blast radius, and get back to remediating the issue there. Again, some of that integration can be done between different products, but as sort of Jamie said, there may be difficult integrations. APIs might not be available. It all might be custom. This is all built in. It's all under one sort of engine, machine learning there to be able to correlate easily on the fly there. And then finally, as Jamie said, cost and licensing efficiency, bringing contracts all into one solution, being able to get the most out of it there. So that's another key driver that we see is trying to do, create those efficiencies. So how do we actually look at the migrations? How do we go through that sort of process? It's on the screen now, but let's just dive into them, one by one. Initially, you have to do that discovery and design. You have to understand what is currently configured, how it is configured, and then also look at the mapping back into Microsoft technology. Now, this might not be a one-to-one mapping. It might not be that Defender for a CrowdStrike configuration is just in Defender for Endpoint. We see a lot of it is actually based on the suite itself, where you use different parts of it to provide the full coverage and beyond that. That mapping is critical because you need to make sure that you're not leaving any gaps or understanding where the technology is slightly different. We see with the example of like Mimecast, where it is policy based, there's a lot of configuration in there that is customizable or can be turned on and turned off by the organization. But in Defender for Office, that stuff is all automated in the background and less, there's less complexity within the configuration. That is all adapted based on user behavior, the types of data you get in from email, that kind of thing. So it's all adjusted and updated as Microsoft make changes to that algorithm, that machine learning, that agent, that kind of thing. So sometimes it's very difficult to understand what that mapping is and to maybe not control it within the Microsoft technology, but it's key to understand that it's that some of the technology works in a different way than what it may be used to.
Alan, just on that, I think one of the things we find here is that cultural shift that internally as an organization, in sometimes it's not necessarily that the tools are exactly the same. You will deliver the same outcome, but maybe in a different mode of operandi, basically.
Yeah, exactly. You sometimes have to think differently about how you're configuring or how you're going to use the next solution. We've had it with organizations as we do migrations that, how do I do X, Y, Z? And it's okay, you don't need to control that anymore. Microsoft or the solution is controlling that for you and adapting to the changes. There's potential risk in configuration in that it becomes stale, stays in there for a long time and never gets updated, with the product updating itself, but also different attacks means that isn't needed anymore. You're now allowing the solution to now adapt itself on the latest attacks or the latest different scenarios that you may have. So allowing that to be sort of dynamic is then a benefit in itself. There's less for you to manage, make sure it's up to date, because configuration, if you don't keep checking it, it becomes stale. We see organizations, when we do these discovery designs, there's a load of configuration that is stale, and they're like, we don't need that anymore, it's a cleanup. We've had Mimecast for 6 years, and we've got different configurations in there that now the users that it's supporting, or it might be like a mail redirect or something, that is now stale. That user's left 3 years ago. It's just still in there. So being able to make it dynamic means that you don't have to worry about that configuration and that review. So once we've got that design and mapping and understanding, we then look to pilot that configuration. Now, with most of the Microsoft technology, it scales well. It doesn't matter if you've got an organization of 100 people to 10,000 users. Normally the configuration, bear in mind there may be some tweaks and a few nuances with users and things like that, but generally the baseline normally hits most of the organization. So being able to do that configuration initially, validate it, then makes the rollout a lot easier. Now when we do the pilot, we then tend to look at just doing a deployment to a single machine. If we talk about endpoint security, validate that the technology is securing the endpoint as expected, meeting our test plans, our success criteria, and then we look at doing a migration from the previous solution to Defender solutions to validate that migration. By doing that sort of validation, we can then be confident about how the migration or the rollout will take place. What communication do we need to provide the users? Is there any impact? Do they need to reboot? Can it run side by side? It's all those sort of questions. We can validate all that by doing a couple of test migrations with trusted users, or testing within the business, in different business areas where you may have some different use cases or different scenarios there. So once we've sort of validated, we're then able to build that plan out for rollout and cutover. We know exactly what it's going to look like, what communication we need, and how we're going to decommission the tools. So that then, as we go through the rollout, we can then work out the waves, how we do it. Is it by domain? Is it by users? Is it servers first? Is it whatever the combination is, we have that idea because we've done that piloting. So the key thing here is that a lot of this is, or the way that we sort of approach this is, it's never big bang. It is always pilot and validate, make sure that it's gonna, it's doing everything we need it to do. We know what the configuration is going to be, to then roll out, to reduce that risk or concern about migration. And again, this might be in some scenarios where you may need technology to stay in place, like a Mimecast, because of mail routing requirements or legislation. You can potentially reduce the licensing on that to remove the security solution part of it, and then move on to having just the protection moved to Microsoft. That again is validating all those sort of scenarios, understanding what you definitely need and what keeps you within your regulation requirements as well. So if I move on, so some of the pitfalls and risks of migrations, and they're in this list here, but trying to do everything once. A lot of our migrations that we do tend to be email and AV or EDR at the same time. They typically seem to be the two combination. Now this is more than likely based on reducing in costs and the efficiencies that you can get from licensing to bring those two into the, because organizations tend to buy the E5 solution, so they want to get as much value out of it as quick as possible. So it tends to be email and EDR at the same time. Whilst we try to do them at the same time, what we tend to do is phase them. So do email or EDR first, or start it, so the design stuff, and then move into the next one as we go, depending on the requirements of the organization, how fast they need to move, because they may have contract renewals due soon, or a regulation they need to adhere to. Depends on which one we may do first, or how quick we need to do it. As I said before, the mapping of the technology, that is key to make sure that you're not going to break a configuration that's been in for 5 to 6 years in like a Mimecast. Being able to make sure that you're going to migrate it, validating it. That is definitely one of the key areas to do that mapping. Where possible, the parallel running, being able to run CrowdStrike next to Defender for Endpoint so that you've got a transition. That is a key area to try and do, because one, you're making sure that you're setting configuration, but also you make sure you're protected as you transition. No one wants to have a small window or a potential issue where there is no protection, especially on an endpoint from that side. Another one is, and again, this isn't technology based, this is more process based, and this is change control, change management, resource access. So understanding an organization's change management is key, because you may have a week delay on being able to roll something out. So be able to hit their CAB schedules when you have to get a change in, that kind of thing is key. But from a resource perspective, some organizations work in sprints. Being able to hit that sprint, they may be working on a 2 or 3 week sprint. So you need to make sure that the project is managing how we get resource in those sprints at the right times, because in effect, if you miss it, then you've got to wait 3 weeks, 2 weeks to then get that resource available to you. So that delays some migrations and realizing the benefits. And finally, success criteria, test plans, being able to confirm that the solution is working as expected, is going to meet the requirements you have, and then also working out, the success criteria for the migration, making sure that all devices are migrated, that kind of thing.
And I think, Alan, just to add one last thing on that, all of these migrations that we've done, that it's fit for purpose across the Defender suite, isn't it? The tried, tested methodology. But I think the other thing that people need to recognize is there will always be a point of fine tuning, of optimization. Many times when we do a move into Sentinel, at first people are always confused or worried by that cost of that initial ingestion charge. And I think what we do then is apply those rules, reconfigure, utilizing data lakes and things like that to ensure that we can drive those costs to a minimal. But at first, with all of these tools, when you map them across, there's going to be this huge part of that, again, cultural shift, that kind of adoption mentality that has to go on, where people look at this and go, this wasn't exactly how it was in the old world. There is a bit of nuance that needs to come with that, and change that comes with that. So giving yourself, most importantly, that clear timeline to ensure that you're doing this effectively and that you've got that cutover can really support organizations on this journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other part to it as well is, as you kind of sort of touched on, is that when moving from another technology, just remember there's a lot of history with the old one, the Mimecast, as an example. Users have mapped out what they deem as spam and what is allowed in. That system has learned what email you get in and what you want to block. When you move to another, as an example, email security solution, it could be, we're talking about Microsoft here, but if it wasn't, to another email, security solution, there's no history there. So you just got to bear in mind as well that sometimes the system's got to start to learn again. And so the first couple of weeks, like you said, John, is fine tuning that configuration. Do I increase the spam filtering up a little bit more because, the previous solution was a bit more resistant to, allowing it to go to mailboxes, that kind of thing. So there is a little bit of tweaking as well. Absolutely. I would say it's never perfect on the first hit, but that's what the migration's for, the pilot, to try and get 90% there, 95% with the final tuning at the end.
Perfect.
So moving on. So now let's look at a use case. one of our example of one of our customers. So this organization had was looking to initially replace their CrowdStrike solution, which was the managed service parts that was including identity and EDR. The customer did have Mimecast, but initially they were keen to keep Mimecast because of their experience with it, and was unsure around Defender for Office, as an example. But through conversation with ourselves, with seeing the market over a month afterwards, they kind of understood that actually it makes sense to move as well, to save costs on that point. So as part of this, once all that sort of agreements, etc., was all sort of sorted out, we then had, I think it was 8 weeks before we had to move Mimecast as the first sort of solution. So we then had to start doing that design mapping, get that all in place, and then start to do migration. So the example was that in the pilot we moved 2 of their domains, was to validate that the configuration was valid, that the process we'd have to go through for their other, I think it was like 10 or 12 domains that they had to move. Being able to validate that, brought ease to the teams on that, on that customer, to that we're not going to disrupt their main domain from email flow, because it was a key, communication with their customers and their services. Again, they were moved from E3 to E5, so they wanted to see that benefit, to reduce that cost, and see that the return on investment from that side. As part of this as well, because they had that managed service with the sort of vendor, in effect, ITC also put in our MXDR service on top to then feed into protecting that organization as well, because that organization itself only had, I say, 5 or 6 users in the security team to be able to manage. I think it was just over 1,000 users for this one. Yes. So being able to bring that in and do the email bit, then they seen value straight away. With that migration, they've seen little differences for the users. It was actually quite streamlined from their side. They did have a less complex configuration in Mimecast, that's fair to say. It was they weren't using some of the other sort of capabilities like archiving and things like that. So we didn't have to understand how we were going to move those solutions into Exchange and things like that. But then after that, we then got straight on to moving identity, the identity solutions and EDR. Again, piloting, testing, servers. This organization was also Mac and Windows, so there was a little bit of complexity there, and using Jamf as the solution. So again, short timelines for this one. I think we had like 3 months, 3 to 4 months, I think, to start looking at from us signing contracts and starting the work. So but again, being able to test the migration, validate it all. The actual migration, I think, only took actually a month to migrate the 1,000 devices plus 100 servers, I think it was, Linux and Windows there. So being able to do that quite rapidly with reduced risk was very key for them. And finally, I suppose with this, they're also to help save or potentially save them money and consolidate. They're looking to look at Jamf F and moving that to Intune for their Mac management side of things, as again, to reduce costs, to get the most out of the licensing there.
I was just going to jump in, Alan, really just to kind of echo what you were saying there, because I think this is a really good case study. I think from my perspective, this is just absolutely kind of bread and butter of what we do, right? Like, we are doing so many of these type of migrations from kind of CrowdStrike to Mimecast. And I mean, I was actually relatively close to this one myself. And I think I mean, just as Alan's alluded to there were kind of two main objectives really objectives and outcomes that we were driving towards with this customer. I think the first, obviously, which we've touched on, is we're just reducing that security risk, right? We've brought in a new managed service. There's a new technology, kind of industry strength technology tool set in there, kind of wrapping everything together. And I think the kind of second outcome that was really important for this customer was ultimately reducing that total cost of ownership. I think that was kind of the key driver here, and the fact that we were able to show enough saving on the technology to allow them to bring a third party in as well to manage that service moving forward, I think was fantastic for this customer. And I guess one of the levers that we deploy as Microsoft to help us do that is we have a fantastic investments program, so we can support financially partners such as ITC to come in, do the migration. So we typically look to potentially provide some investment from a Microsoft perspective if you are looking to move to an E5 platform and kind of bring in a new kind of partner to support you. So yeah, we've got a lot of kind of tools in the toolkit, so to speak, to kind of help with that financial burden of cost of change moving forward. So yeah, no, just wanted to add that, Alex. I think this is a really good case study there.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. I think that is me done, and I'm on to John now.
Yeah, so it's just an opportunity really for anybody with any questions that they might want to write into the chat and have answered. On your part earlier, Jamie, we kind of touched loosely on some of the licensing, and obviously it's a bit of a buzzword at the moment going around the marketplaces, the E7 license. And it'd be interesting just to understand, since we've got you on the phone, and I'm sure everybody here is keen as well to understand this. What is really the difference between an E5 and an E7 license? What do you get as kind of that additional add-on?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, to be fair, John. I guess there's probably kind of three main elements to it. Obviously, within E7, you're going to get M365 Copilot, but I guess probably the two others that are most relevant for this audience here is firstly Entra Suite, which is effectively our advanced identity technology tool set. It's got a few different capabilities in it: identity governance, secure web gateway, VPN. But I think probably the most interesting piece that differentiates kind of E5 and E7 is our latest innovation, Agent 365. And this is all about how we help organizations secure, manage and govern agents in their organization. I think what's really interesting about Agent 365 is we are simply extending the security controls that you already have in place today, whether it's through Defender or Entra or Purview. We're extending that security infrastructure, those controls, those policies onto agents, right? There is absolutely a view from us, and I think in the market, that you need to replicate the security controls you already have for your users, your human users, onto your agents, right? And Agent 365 is absolutely going to kind of help you do that. So I think definitely, I mean, with the theme of today in terms of eliminating complexity, right? You don't want to have to go out and procure another third-party tool set to secure and govern your agents. If you can just extend what you're already doing within the Microsoft Security Suite, I think that's definitely going to help you save on that complexity perspective. So yeah, I think that's probably how I'd summarize it, John, in terms of the main differences between E5 and E7.
Spot on. I think, just for everybody's understanding, I'm sure you're all very much aware of this, but the EU AI Act that's coming out is all about understanding the agents and the tooling that you're utilizing within your organization and how that is being governed from both a data but also a technology forefront. So with that tooling that's brought in with E7, I'm sure that they'll be around that compliance piece, which I think is up to the value of 7% of global turnover is the risk by sort of 28, 29. So yeah, thanks for that. I haven't seen any questions pop up as yet, but if there is anything that pops up following this session, of course, we will come back and we'll answer anything that does. Appreciate everybody's busy. I just wanted to touch on the next slide, please, Alan, if that's okay. And by all means, any questions that come in the meantime, please don't hesitate to put them in, and we'll respond to them. But I just wanted to touch on this, and I think this goes back to the point. A lot of this is about discovery. A lot of this is about understanding where, as an organization, you sit on that roadmap for moving from that kind of disparate silo-based technologies, which are all fantastic in their own right, But if you're on that journey and you're going, look, we have made this investment into this E5, E7, security stack, you're looking at unifying some of those things. You really need to understand where you are, and you need to break that down into a couple of areas. The first area is, am I doing this for regulatory compliance? Am I doing this because I've got a contract that's coming up for renewal? Am I doing this because I've got a license renewal coming up? Because these are the typical things that we see people facing these quandaries. And they've got a license renewal 3 months before their contract renewal with their CrowdStrike or their Mimecast or something like that. So understanding where you are on your journey is absolutely vital to the success of this. What we will then do is work with Microsoft and with anybody that wants to communicate and talk about this process, and we'll work out what funding is eligible to yourselves, and we'll offset that funding to do a Microsoft Security Investment Assessment. I know it's a huge mouthful of a sentence there, but what we are fundamentally doing is looking at all the technology in your environment and building with you a phased approach to migrating that across to Microsoft to give you a full pack, which enables you to understand that TCO, so that total cost of ownership of that migration. And in parallel of that, if you do, what license uplift you may require with that as well. So the idea is that at the end of it, you don't just kind of look at this and think, I've got half of the picture. The idea is that you've got the full picture of how you can migrate the business over a period of time to that promised land of unified SecOps. I think, again, this is security at your pace. This is about not doing that big bang approach that Alan was talking about earlier, taking things as a risk adverse as you can do, but whilst delivering what's needed to be delivered against your requirements as an organization. So yeah, those are the next steps. Get in touch, we'll check the eligibility for the Microsoft funding, and we will schedule and sort a security investment assessment to help. I believe there's one question that's come in, so I will just have a quick look at that as my wonderful computer loads up. What did the customers that moved from Mimecast do with their archived emails? Great question. Great question. Alan.
Yep. So it depends on, some of the customers looked at sort of third-party solutions to do that archiving, journaling side of things. But we have seen customers but look into the archiving as part of the Exchange Online side of things. A lot of the sort of capability of journaling, being able to identify sort of those emails for regulation, potentially can be covered by Purview to be able to do that e-discovery detection or whatever may be required. That's kind of the things that we see. It depends on the customer's requirements, things like that, on that side. I think some of the things we've seen in the past is that if they are in Mimecast, they tend to sort of stay there with some of that, because they may need to wait for retention periods or the data to be moved out of that environment, and it can take some time to make that viable.
Absolutely. Hopefully that answered the question. I think the answer, truthfully, is that it's not the most straightforward, the archiving side of things when you do that migration, but there are options to make that work. One of those, like Alan said and alluded to, I know we've got a customer that stripped back their Mimecast just to the archiving for exactly that reason that Alan was talking around retention before they could move that elsewhere. And of course, there are other third-party tools or ways in which you can manage that through the Microsoft tooling itself as well. But it always comes down to that discovery, that check and balance. What can move, what can't move as part of that matrix, what does and what doesn't work, and what's your expectation versus requirement, and all of those things. So again, it goes back to those next steps. If this is something of interest and an area that you're looking to take a journey on, have the conversation with us. We'll work out what funding we can get to it. We're willing to put a bit of investment behind it ourselves as well to support organizations in that Microsoft security investment assessment. The idea really is to help you build out that future plan with all the stones turned over. Okay. I think that's it for the questions. Like I said, if there's anything else that you wish to follow up on at any point, don't hesitate to reach out. We'll obviously follow this up with a copy of the recording and an email with the contact details of those involved from an ITC perspective, as well as Jamie. And if there's any questions or queries you have in relation to this, don't hesitate to reach out for a conversation with Alan and the team. But thank you all very much for your time. Jamie, Alan, anything else you wanted to wrap up with?
No, nothing from myself other than, yeah, thank you. Yeah, happy to take any questions offline. But yeah, have a fantastic rest of your day.
Yeah, no, for me, it was good to chat to everybody.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. All the best. Bye-bye.